Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Goldster PPG, I should have said. I'm thrilled to welcome Jared Brown, who is a co-founder of Sipsmith, but of so much more as well. So, Jared, welcome. It's so lovely to have you here today.
Thank you, Lucinda. It's wonderful to see you.
So, tell me, first of all, you've had such a fascinating and varied career. Tell us how you started out in the world of alcohol. I know you've done other things as well, but what was it like? When did you decide, I know what I want to do? I want to make alcohol.
There were a few years of informal wine training before I realized I would only ever be an enthusiastic amateur of wine. But then I started making cider. And after 2 years of cider making, a school friend of mine told me about freeze distillation, where you can put it out in the snow, freeze it, lift out the ice, put it back out, do that about 5 times, and you've concentrated the alcohol, but you've also concentrated the acetone, the methanol, the isopropanol. It was horrible. So by age 11, I'd given up that, and I was raiding the liquor cabinet for base spirits to make liqueurs.
Age 11, you'd given up on wine and started on cider. I'm slightly concerned about your childhood here, Jared.
Oh, no, that was me giving up on cider. The wine training started when I was 6.
Okay.
A family friend was fascinated by the maturing acuity of my palate at that time.
How incredible. Wow. And social services didn't get involved at any point in this?
It was the 70s. What social services?
So tell us, you're talking about the snow and the ice. So where did you grow up where you had all this snow and ice?
I grew up in upstate New York. Now, Brits tend to be a little unaware of the fact that you could leave Manhattan and drive 11 hours due north, and you're still in New York.
Yes.
So I was born and raised in Ithaca, New York, up in the Finger Lakes region. It's about 5 hours northwest of New York City.
And so when you'd given up on the cider, when you were, what, 11, you said, what happened next?
After that, a whole run of different thoughts of what to do with my life got almost through university, but realized I wasn't ready to finish university at that time.
What were you studying then?
In university, I was studying and teaching computer science. And of course, that's like learning a language changes every 5 years.
Yes.
So to have been a tutor in BASIC, in Fortran, it has no applicability anymore than mastering Esperanto.
Yes, that's so true. So you decided that something that was unchanging was going to be people's appetite for alcohol, or was it not?
No. This all happened accidentally. When I met my wife, we talked about what we wanted to do in life. We both wanted to write, and we'd both done a little bit of writing at the time. I'd written a shopping guide to Midtown Manhattan for guests of the Essex House Hotel. She'd written a walking tour of the Jewish Lower East Side, and well, that was it. But it turned out one person we both knew in common was a literary agent. It took years to discover that he was just about the worst possible agent. But the first thing he said to us was, well, give me a book proposal and I'll pitch it out there, not go get some clippings. Build up a portfolio of short pieces, and then I could sell you into publishers. So in 2 years, we generated, I believe it was 198 book proposals.
Wow. And did any of them get taken up?
No, not one. Not one. We still have a set of 3 large 3-ring binders filled with rejections. Yep. All came quick except for one children's book that we proposed to Disney Publishing. Mm-hmm. And that was the rejection. Well, it climbed the ladder to the top of the big top. It became a book series. They wanted it as an animated television series. They decided it was going to be Disney's next animated feature film. And then the editor who brought it in left, and the new editor only wanted fresh ideas.
Fantastic. So you had all these ideas, and you have gone on to write together, I believe, with your wife. Is this right? 37 books and over 3,000 articles.
Yes, but what broke us through was Macmillan Publishing, New York, said, actually, we love your travel book series proposal, and yes, we always aimed big with these proposals. And they said, but actually, we just need writers to write the Romer's Guide to Vancouver and Victoria, and the Romer's Guide to British Columbia chapters for the Romer's Canada. And so we spoke to a few people about it, and one old travel writer said, oh, you don't even need to go to the place, just call the tourism board, look at the other travel books. We looked at each other, said, no, we'll take the job, but we're going straight there.
I'm really glad. As a former travel writer myself, I'm extremely glad that you went there. That's appalling advice from someone you don't even need to go there.
Well, we went on a 3-week research trip, fell in love with the place, with Vancouver, British Columbia. Within a month, we'd sold Anastasia's flat in New York, loaded the remaining half of our furniture into a moving van, drove across the country, and stayed 3 years writing 6 books about it. But I'll never forget when our first one came out, because the next year, there were all of these competing travel books containing every mistake we'd made.
It's definitely true. I've worked in travel publishing as an editor and as a writer, and I just sometimes look at things and think, how do people get away with saying this when you go somewhere and you discover it's blatantly not true? I think my favorite was when I was traveling in Peru, and I had a footprints guide, and we stayed in this particular hostel because it claimed that they would pick up your luggage from the bus station. And when we got there was no bus station. It was a town with one road, and the bus went down, and actually, as it got to that hostel, the guy from the hostel, without even opening the gate, reached across, picked up our backpacks and walked into the hostel. The bus stopped right outside. And I thought, that was written by someone who's never been to this place, and they've written it on, based on some kind of press release that the backpacker hostel sent out. But yeah, so that gave me one of my best tips when I was travel writing, which was always go to the place. Never, ever rely on the tourist board or the press releases. So you had this love affair with Canada. And how long did you stay there? Because you're not based in Canada now.
3 years. We would have stayed longer, except we had US citizenship at the time, and applying for landed immigrant status in Canada, we needed to get a FBI background check. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to take 6 weeks. It arrived in 6 months, the day that we loaded the moving van to head south to San Francisco.
And is this because somebody had said, oh, this is the boy who tried to make cider when he was 11, and they decided they were going to look into your background quite extensively?
Oh, no, but immaculate background, I've got to say. They never caught up to any of that. But it was one summer in Canada, the literary agent I mentioned before came for a visit and said one very intelligent thing. He said, this is 1995. He said, this internet, I think it's going to be big. You should get on it, build a website. That evening, Anastasia was in front of the computer when I walked in with 2 martinis. And she said, what should we build a website on? We put up a martini website. It exploded. People from around the world writing in with their favorite personal recipe, favorite bartender. We put up a writing competition on this website for your best martini story. First prize was a shaker we bought for $10 Canadian. Second prize, $5 something, and so on down from there. Gerald Posner, who wrote Killing the Dream, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, he entered. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, a couple of their writers entered. One of my
Wow.
favorite was it turned out the National Institute of Mental Health in Washington had a martini club. Doesn't that make sense? And they entered a story. So all of these
Fantastic.
accumulated in 6 months. Editor from HarperCollins emailed and said, please, can we turn this into a book?
How wonderful.
So it went in very quickly, in fact, so quickly that when the managing editor rang us up a couple of months later and said, oh, very bad news for you, so sorry about this, but we are canceling about 200 titles this season. Yours is one of them, nothing personal, you can keep your advance. And I said, well, then I owe you an apology. Why? Well, we delivered early. If you check your records, you're already printing our book. It's on press. What? Oh, and she hung up. She rang back about an hour later, and 5,000 copies. What on earth are we going to do with 5,000 copies of a book on martinis? It's a dead subject. Nobody's interested in that. I suppose it'll just get remaindered off. And then the first orders came in. I think Pier 1 and Williams Sonoma wanted 15,000 copies each. It went into 17 printings before the pub date.
Fantastic.
In its life, it's run 500,000 copies. And I don't recall what's happened to that managing editor, but the book's still going well.
Well, that's great. That's absolutely brilliant. I love that story because you normally hear these kind of terrible publishing stories. So that's a wonderful one. So after that, you were living in San Francisco. And what happened while you were there? You were still travel writing?
We were writing. Oh, let's see if I can remember everything that we were writing at that point. Travel writing. I believe we had a book on astrology going. My wife, Anastasia, is a very accomplished astrologer. And I was a curious student of the subject, but that was as far as I ever got that, and being a historian on the subject with her. But we were writing that. Oh, I believe we may have been writing the only book drier than our martini book, which was a history of optometry in America.
Wow. And was that as big a seller as your martini book?
No.
Just wonder how many optometrists there are in America. I mean, you could have been onto a really good seller there.
But the whole point of that one was that the optometry book, that was very simple. They were paying us. And we learned early on, if you want to break through in writing, don't say no. Someone approaches you to write a book, oh, just write it.
I think I totally agree with that. Yes. If somebody approaches you and they want you to write a book, pretty much in the world of writing, that's what most people are going to say.
But that one threw us in full time to writing about drink for various publications, judging cocktail competitions, assisting people with spirit development. But San Francisco was far too social, because we were writing 5 books simultaneously at that time.
Yeah.
And so we thought, Boise, Idaho, surely that would be quiet.
Why Boise, Idaho? Just because it's quiet, or did you have a particular reason for going there?
I visited an older sister who lives in Boise. And I think third visit, she said, you're moaning about San Francisco. You've said that you love it here. Why don't you move to Boise? It'll be quiet. And the poorest we were in our married life as writers. First year in Boise, I believe we grossed about 12 or 14,000 US, and maybe 1,000 up from that the next year. But oddly, when we were moving there, we were looking for 1 bed, 1 bath, 2 bed, 1 bath, perhaps. The house we found was a 14-room, 4,000 square foot Victorian. And
Affordable.
we'd gone to look at it with no intent of renting. And I even told the landlord that on the phone beforehand. And he said he was happy to have us round. After 45 minutes walking through this sprawling Victorian mansion, he spoke first. Thankfully, he said, "Are you sure you don't want this house?" He said, I'll cut the rent in half. I'll cut it back to a third.
Wow. He was so desperate to get rid of it. Was it haunted?
No, he said, otherwise I'll end up with students and they'll make a mess of it.
That's so true. Wow, that's the kind of thing you dream about when you're renting.
Truly. And believe me, it's only happened once in my life.
So how long did you stay in Idaho for?
2 years there, and then moved back to Manhattan, where I'd met my wife. And there we moved into a bed sit exactly the same size of kitchen in that house in Idaho.
And so all this time you were writing, you were doing travel articles.
Mm-hmm.
And was Sipsmith ever something, the idea of co-founding a distillery, is this something that had actually been taking taking kind of hold at this point, or was it just something that would happen out of the blue later on?
It's remarkable how many years it took in the foment and the development of this idea, because on arriving in New York, my wife got a job as creative director for a marketing and public relations firm, paying about 5 times what I could get as a bartender. And one of the first clients that she was given was a vodka, new brand out of Sweden and Norway. They brought me in for the meeting as well. We liked the bottle. The name was eye-catching, and then we tasted the liquid. It was horrible. And they said, "Oh, do you think you could do better?" Easily. The other thing we'd been doing in Idaho was we'd met Kevin Stettles opening the Bardonnay, which was North America's first micro distillery restaurant.
Right.
And he'd used that martini book as a Bible to set up his bar. And the bar was enormous. The place had 350 seats. The bar top was 72 feet long. The back bar 15 feet high with library ladders. And it was like walking into this heaven that we'd only created on paper.
Fantastic. Wow. And that all came from your martini book.
And he'd gotten a still. We'd never distilled commercially. He'd never distilled. In our collective innocence, we started with gin because we loved gin. It took a stack of awards, but really? We were still going broke in Idaho. So New York, there's vodka. We sent our notes. And the master distiller at the Monopoly Distillery in Oslo received our notes. And after realizing that we could tell his starting and finishing fermentation temperatures in the final distillate of vodka, things like that, he said to the Norwegians, "Get them over here."
Wow. So what was that like?
Oh, that started 6 years of commuting from Manhattan to Sweden and Norway. In the first 2 years, we developed the spirit, which took best white spirit in the world from the biggest international competition at the time. And after that, suddenly, not only were we on the way with this vodka, but we were doing distillery consulting work everywhere from Brazil to Vietnam. But even this crossed over into writing. The Bill Gates of Brazil, the owner of the internet there, also owned a cachaça brand. Cachaça is the Brazilian cane spirit, the parent of rum. That's one of the top selling white spirits in the world. Most people don't know of it because 98% of it is consumed domestically. But when you go to Brazil, you've got to have a caipirinha.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so the vodka was moving along well. We found ourselves in the nightclub business in New York. Oh, Krishasa, I lost train of that thought. He actually brought us there to write the first English language history of Kashasa.
Wow.
And that was a fascinating research trip. He gave us a personal assistant, a translator, a driver, a bodyguard, and a Kashasa master distiller to travel with us on a flight every morning to a different producing area of Brazil, spend the day, the night there, and then on to the next.
How
And so we
incredible.
hopscotched Brazil for about 2 weeks. And it was fascinating because we did discover that this was the parent of rum.
Right. And so from that, you then went back to Manhattan, or
And
what?
we were in Manhattan till 2005. We realized that we'd landed in London 24 times, crossing between Norway and Sweden and New York.
Mhm.
Thought it was time to move over, time to divest from the nightclub. And so we landed in London. Losing the nightclub had cost us a bit.
Mhm.
We reevaluated our position with our partners in vodka. Wonderful people, but they weren't the people we wanted to do business with. So
Mhm.
one lunch, we sat them down. After lunch, I took out a pile of papers from my briefcase, handed them all these papers we'd signed ahead of time. And at the time, our shares in this company were worth about 8.6 million. And we walked away from that lunch with a total net worth of minus 50 grand in my student loans.
Oh, wow.
Oh, the looks on their faces were priceless. But then a week after that, we were presenting the 200-year history of the cocktail abridged in 45 minutes at the London Bar Show. We had declared it the bicentennial of the cocktail based on the earliest definition of the word cocktail appearing in print, 12th of May, 1806, in the Balance and Columbian Repository, Hudson, New York.
Gosh, that's much earlier than I would have thought. I would have thought it was an early 20th century invention, but it was an early 19th century invention.
Well, that's when it was first defined. The earliest use of the word cocktail in print I discovered later, and that was in the London Morning Post and Gazetteer, a newspaper for the area around Downing Street.
Mhm.
And 20th March 1798, they used the word cocktail referring to a drink in a political satire of who owed for what in the heart of British politics.
Yeah.
The Acton Gate Tavern was torn down in 1834 to expand the Prime Minister's residence.
Wow, that's fascinating. And do you know what the very first cocktail ever made in the world, or recorded, I should say, was?
In that 1806 definition, it was spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters, vulgarly called a bitter sling and considered excellent electioneering potion as it weakened the mind while it stoutened the heart.
So, talking of Downing Street and the nearby area, you have been the gin distiller for the House of Commons. How did that come about?
I have, and that came about once Sipsmith was up and running,
Right.
and our MP reached out saying, would you, we've tasted your gin. We absolutely love your London Dry. Would you consider coming in for a 2-year appointment as our gin distiller? And so I took advantage, headed over, spent a couple of days wandering the halls of Parliament, mostly tasting where this gin would be consumed. An old stone building on a river, cold, damp, mineral. So I made a very classic London dry gin that gave the impression of warm wood paneling, deep carpet, and a bouquet of flowers in the corner.
Okay, so how do you even begin going about creating that kind of taste, that kind of particular gin?
Now, back in Idaho, we'd distilled over 100 different botanicals separately, got to know exactly what they did. And in this case, for the wood paneling, a single medium peppercorn in a 300-liter still, a large peppercorn, and I'd have chucked in the whole wood pile. So that was simple. And for the carpet, roses, rose petals, which give absolutely no rose flavor whatsoever in distillation. They give a chamomile
Wow.
flavor. So that dry straw, that a flavor not a million miles from carpeting.
So, I mean, do you go back through centuries old herbal books and things? Do you spend your life discovering properties of things?
Very much. We've got about a 1800 volume collection at home back into the 1600s, books on drink, all aspects of drink, plus a rather large box filled with original copies of excise acts pertaining to drink back into the 1600s and up through the 1800s.
Fascinating. Okay, so I pulled you forward by asking about the House of Commons. So let's go back to Sipsmith and how this came about.
So presenting 200-year history of drink at the London Bar Show, a couple of people approached us afterwards asking if we were willing to give the valuation of a collection of wine and spirits. Too broke to say no at that moment. So they whisked us off to an island in the south of France where Paul Ricard, founder of Pernod Ricard, had built a cathedral to wine and spirits back in the 50s. 10 soaring frescoed alcoves painted by young artists selected by Picasso and Dali. 9,000 bottles in there, and they figured the bottles would be worth about 275, 300 grand. They looked at the wines. I walked in, the first bottle that caught my eye was an 1806 cognac made to celebrate the birth of Napoleon's son.
Wow.
And I'd seen one a month earlier in the Daily Mail because it had just been auctioned at Sotheby's for 172,000. And in this bottle, the liquid loss was far less. So I just rather flippantly said, well, that bottle conservatively 175 grand. Let's see what else he's got. Walked along, and that cognac 50, that one 70 grand. Oh, those two whiskeys there, those are 100 grand each. Kept walking, and after about 10 minutes, it hit me. I could give a valuation of a collection. Who knew? But when we gave our final report, we also gave them instructions on how to restore the museum if they wanted to. From when I'd gone up and I'd done a roof inspection, foundation needed reinforcement, asbestos abatement, deacidifying acid paper labels to stop them chemically burning. And we gave them about 135 pages on this.
Yeah.
They said, we don't understand half of this, but we feel like you should come do it. So we're on this island part-time, 3 years, restoring a museum of wine and spirits. They gave us a private bar on the island to turn into an invitation-only bar school, to write text for the curriculum we wanted to put together. We wrote a history of drink 7000 BC to the 20th century.
Wow.
Still available on Amazon. It's called Spiritus Journey Volumes 1 and 2. Though, inside tip, I'd wait till we update it.
So you spent a couple of years living in the south of France, is that right?
commuting up to London, where we found ourselves with Desmond Payne, master distiller, Beefeater. And we put together a gin symposium, brought in representatives of all 12 brands or 12 companies making gin in Britain at that time. And every gin influencer and bartender managers that we could find took over the Electric Cinema in Portobello. About
Wow.
120 people in there, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. We began with a 2-hour Fidel Castro rant at them about how they were responsible for the death of the category that we all loved by paying attention to the bottom shelf, which was genteelly losing 3 to 5% a year, but was still worth billions, and ignoring the opportunity to create a great gin, which could grow 100% a year for at least the next 10 years. Off the back of that, we found ourselves working on the Beefeater 24. Beefeater's high-end gin in the distillery. When we finished that gin, we threw a Negroni party, and 2 young Brits from Cornwall who'd been off working in the States, inspired by the craft movement there, they were dying to come over and start something up of their own in London. And they wanted to see what a distillery looked like. So they tried to get an invite into Beefeater, but we had shut the visitors center. We were, my wife and I were revamping the visitors center for Beefeater at the time. And they managed to blag an invite to our Negroni party. At the party, they were chatting with a gin writer from Scotland, whose book we actually published. We also have we've formed a small publishing company because we realized the publishing houses don't know as much about how to launch books on drink as we do.
Yeah, fair enough.
And when they were offering us a deal where they'd take 94% and then come to us and say, okay, how do you promote it?
Yes.
So what we've done is we give our writers 50% and work very closely with them on promoting.
And what's the name of your publishing company? Let's give it a little bit of...
Mixellany, Mixellany.
Mixellany, great name.
A miscellany of drink, but we wanted a word that wouldn't Google so that we'd be able to track our growth very lazily, and that's worked. But anyway, the 2 young Brits at the party talking to the Scottish gin writer, they start talking about a micro distillery in the American West and wondering if she's heard anything about this place. And she said, well, there is an American here, he'll probably know. I'm sure you get that about Britain when you're traveling.
Absolutely. You're expected to know every one of your fellow compatriots.
Well, they came over and she said, micro distillery restaurant in the States. I said, Bardonnay, Boise, Idaho. Wait, how do you know this? That's where it gets on. On the station, I worked there as well, but got chatting with them, and I'd already had 2 business partners. We were working on developing a gin, but they weren't business people. It was 3 creatives together, which was just going to go nowhere. And I got speaking to Sam and Fairfax, realized they were as staunchly traditionalist as I was about gin. You know, that writing about history or making something from history, you start by learning the history. And they didn't approach me with any odd botanicals, which that was mostly what I was getting at that time, was people saying, what would you think about making a gin with the scorpion's tail botanical from the Amazon? No, absolutely not. But, you know, so I realized pretty much on the spot, these were going to be my business partners. Though my wife does have some hard and fast rules, such as never trust a woman with perfect nails or a man with perfect hair, as she looked at Sam. So we had to go to lunch with Sam a few weeks later, and that cleared up very quickly. And yeah, meanwhile, Sam and Fairfax have been working on getting a distilling license. And so I asked them if they had enough money to do their whole dream as a distillery restaurant. And they said, no, do you have enough money for the still? Yeah, great, let's get the still. Let's put it under the cheapest roof we can find. Fairfax found that roof in Brackenbury Village between Hammersmith and Shepherd's Bush in this garage that I think he was the only one of the three of us who hadn't been there before, ironically, because that had been Michael Jackson's London headquarters for the last 30 years. Oh, yeah, not that Michael Jackson.
Right.
the beer hunter, the whiskey and beer writer. So it was in this garage that people like Alan Jenkins, editor of Observer Food Monthly, cut his teeth editing Michael's work, where Dave Broom, the world-renowned whiskey and rum writer, started out writing for Michael.
It's just up the road from, I used to do copywriting for Innocent Drinks when they were in that part of London as well. So it was obviously a very drinks orientated. Mine was obviously a lot less alcoholic than yours.
But a good mixer.
Yes, absolutely.
When it becomes not so innocent. And early on, I do recall doing some exchanges with Innocent around the holidays.
So you began Sipsmith. What year was that it began?
2009, we ran our first production batch of gin, 14th of May. And we'd gotten our license the year before, though the clerk had finally worked out how to write a distillery license, which she used customs and excise note paper torn from a pad of paper. You could see the perforations at the top. And that entity had ceased to exist in 2006. So she was using up old paper, wrote distillery license in, spilled a bit of coffee on it, stamped it, or wrote the date 2008, but accidentally stamped it 2009. So we were moonshining for the first time.
Oh, wow. But it's been a phenomenal success, hasn't it? How did you get it out there? Do you think you just happened to find a market that people wanted, or did you really have to persuade people that gin was something they should be looking at again?
And we desperately had to persuade people to look at gin, because if you walked into an off license around that time, buying anything else, they'd want to see ID. Gin, they just wanted to make sure you had a bus pass. Nobody under 60 was buying gin at that time. As I said, 12 distilleries in Britain were making gin. It was on the basis of our legal work that the small distilleries began to proliferate, because we had to get an exemption to an excise act from 1825 that said no person shall own a still under 400 gallons, which is about 1,800 liters, which is enormous.
Wow. So all this ancient bit of legislation that no one had ever thought to repeal, you came up against.
Yeah. And thankfully, Gordon Brown, then Exchequer, was absolutely up for seeing this one defanged, because he thought it would benefit his constituency up in the north. Never occurred the first application would come from the doorstep.
So how many different types of gin have you created for Sipsmith?
We've done a lot of limited editions, though, to tell a secret, everything's a limited edition till it's a runaway success. But up there behind me on the top
very
shelf,
impressive display.
You'll see, of course, always front and center our London dry gin.
Yeah.
That's the one that means most to me, in its green label and green top. Though next to it, there's another bottle of London dry gin. It's same gin, but the wax top is red, the label is blue. That was a very limited edition that we made for Her Majesty's, I won't say 90th birthday.
Gosh, so how did you, because you talked about how you created the one for the House of Commons. How did you create that one then? What were the notes?
This was purely our classic London Dry, but just commemorative bottling.
Oh, okay, right.
And we delivered 2 bottles to Buckingham Palace in a gift box, which was received by someone there, not exactly sure who. And it was a few weeks later, she was being interviewed in her drawing room. And there, on the sideboard, in the background, you can see one of the bottles we'd sent.
How exciting was that?
It was about half gone.
I was going to say, I hope she'd already opened it, because if it was still there pristine, you'd have thought, oh, that was just placement. But the fact that she'd actually been drinking from it, that's wonderful.
So we were overjoyed about that, because it wasn't long after we'd started. When we started, it was just 3 of us in this tiny West London garage, where export was anywhere outside London, across the M25, and distribution was a moped.
So you and Anastasia grow botanicals in your garden, is that right? What kind of things do you grow, and what do you really prize to use in your creations?
Oh, to me, good gin, like good wine, begins with fingers in the soil and finishes with sitting down and serving it. But we grow angelica root, which is the herbaceousness underlying gin. We grow licorice, which gives gin its sweetness, gives no licorice flavor in distillation, but is called distiller's sugar. And
Right.
it used to be a big British crop, a northern crop. Think of Pontefract cakes.
Yes. Okay.
They're
And not
today,
anymore. Is it never grown here now commercially?
truly not. It's because the Industrial Revolution made cereal crops far more profitable.
Right.
And most of the world's licorice now comes from India and the Arabian Peninsula, where it grows in much sandier soil and where labor is much cheaper. But it's fascinating that something 76% of the world's licorice harvest is sold to the American tobacco industry to add sweetness to American tobacco.
Wow. That's incredible. So what kind of things have you, is there something you've discovered that you had never thought about using before, or have you kind of
in the garden? Absolutely. Some of the more fun ones, a little off topic, the tomatillos, the little Mexican, it's like a tomato, but it comes already wrapped in its own paper.
Mm-hmm.
And has a gorgeous citrus flavor. And it never occurred to me that those would not only grow well, but self-seed in the garden. I've been doing a lot of work with lemon verbena, and the lemon verbena ended up in our version of the Pimm's cup.
Ah, well, it's fascinating, because I think there's probably so many plants that used to be ubiquitous here that we don't even know about today. Probably native plants. And are you rediscovering a lot of these?
Oh, very much. Working with the seeds of the hogweed, not the giant hogweed, which everyone knows to stay away from, yes. But the hogweed has a flavor like coriander. And it's fascinating to play around with. Though, actually, probably the best find in the garden this year was black truffles.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Which it turns out, grow across Britain. And a neighbor has a truffle dog, brought the truffle dog round, turned up a few truffles, then mentioned that she'd be hosting the Truffle Dog Owners Association. And I said, well, I'd be very happy to make the drinks.
So have you created a truffle gin?
Absolutely. And honestly, not cheap and cheerful, but dead simple. Take a reasonable sized truffle, probably about 28, 30 grams, slice it very thinly, put it into a jar with a bottle of gin, so about 70 cl, and then let that sit for about 10 days. And in all likelihood, you'll need to add a second bottle of gin to that to make it balance.
Wow, that's just so intriguing. Well, we first met last year when we were working together on a program with Miriam Margley's Miriam's Dickensian Christmas, and you were making the most wonderful drink in emulation of the drink made by Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol. And I was very grateful because you made me a delicious one, alcohol-free gin twist just for me, didn't you? And for those who were driving as well. So tell us, what was the gin twist in A Christmas Carol, and how did you create it?
In A Christmas Carol, it was simply referred to as gin punch. Mm-hmm. And in writing, I believe only gin and lemon were mentioned.
Yes.
In the text, which was absolutely appropriate because they wouldn't have mentioned sugar and water. Mm-hmm. And gin twist was the top-selling gin drink of the harsh winter of 1822, so popular that John Tim wrote a 149-line poem extolling the virtues of that drink. And then another poet wrote a shorter poem extolling the virtues both of the drink and of the previous poem. And this proliferated, but what they were doing was taking 50 mils gin, 25 mils fresh lemon, a couple of tablespoons of sugar, or 25 mils of simple syrup, which I generally just make up some simple syrup, equal measures of sugar, water, simmer it a little bit, stick it in a jar, and it's much easier to work with. And then about 100 mils of water from the kettle, or you could put it in the microwave, which takes only a minute, or if you want to be Dickensian about it, you can heat it in 5 seconds by pulling a red hot fire poker out of the fire. And don't plunge it directly in. The liquid expands so quickly, you end up with an empty cup and a wet face. But if you touch it to the surface and then count 2, 3, 4, 5 as you lower that into the liquid and remove it, it will now be beyond boiling. It caramelizes the sugars in the drink a bit. It adds a little activated charcoal. And this is what they drank.
And I can vouch for the fact that it was wonderful, and it really did caramelize it. And everybody in the film set we were absolutely thrilled. I mean, we had to keep making you do it again and again because it was such a fascinating process to watch. I think you had about 4 pokers in the fire and you were going between them all. And we were all completely amazed at the ability that you could do this. It just felt like we'd gone back in time.
It was such good fun. And then I made one other drink that day. I made Smoking Bishop.
Yes, and tell everybody what Smoking Bishop is.
At the end of A Christmas Carol, when Scrooge has come to his senses and he sits Cratchit down and he shares a drink with them, he shares a drink of Smoking Bishop. And this is a drink made with port, sugar, gin, but most importantly, citrus. I used orange and lemon, studded with cloves, and then roasted in a small pan. So the liquid running out of the roasting fruit across the cloves that have been stuffed in the holes builds up in the small roasting pan. Then drop that into a big pot with the port, with a bit of sugar, with the gin, with water and stir that round, and that is smoking bishop. Oh, there was one ingredient I forgot to mention about in the gin twist. The reason it was called gin twist is because you included a fresh lemon twist, which proved this was an ultimate luxury. Actual citrus fruit and actual citrus juice, rather than that horrid bottled shelf stable stuff, which they had to put up with even back then.
So we've got a question here from Denise. Do you have time for other interests outside of Sipsmith, writing and traveling?
Oh, very much. My wife and I also love to cook, and we cook extensively. These days we are focusing mainly on Japanese, wandered a little into Italian for the truffle season, a touch of Chinese cooking. I am an avid photographer. I do a little bit of painting, sumie, which is just black watercolor ink on paper, Japanese technique that I was taught when I was 10. And I still try to keep a hand in with it.
Wow. So I don't know how you have time for growing things in your garden as well, because you're just constantly busy.
The truth is we don't sleep much.
I can understand. Now, there's a couple more things. We've talked a little bit about you having been, working for the House of Commons. But am I right that you were head bartenders for a White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington? Tell us how.
For a couple of them, in fact, at the Watergate Hilton, with 1,000 or 600 guests before dinner, 1,000 after dinner. It's around 2005, 6, 7, and they put us up to creating a political satire menu, which was such fun. But I'll never forget walking into the stockroom in the Watergate Hilton on first visit. Yeah. They were showing us all these old bottles of vermouth. Now, vermouth is a wine. It breathes, it rots, it dies. If you keep it in the fridge, it'll last 10 to 15 times longer, but vermouth sat there out for a few weeks. It's compost. Should not go into a drink. And we said to the stock manager, we can't use these. We need fresh vermouth. And he said, no fresh bottles till these are gone. My wife looked at the shelves, which were metal shelves held up by these ring pins. She stuck her fingers through the rings. She pulled, she stepped back. The shelf collapsed to the concrete floor. All the bottles shattered. And with the pins dangling off her fingers, she looked at him and said, okay, those are gone.
That is a wonderful story. Thank you. So despite having caused chaos there, you've now been asked to create a bespoke gin for a new client, haven't you?
Oh, yes. Well, actually, this one we created for the 100th anniversary of the Singapore Sling, the famous drink from the Long Bar in Raffles in Singapore. Mm-hmm. Now, had I picked up the phone when they called, I'm sure I would have turned down this request. I've turned down hundreds of requests for bespoke spirit because I can't make them all.
Yeah.
But I didn't answer. Sam did. And Sam said to the woman on the line, sorry, where are you calling from? She started to explain what Raffles was. He said, no, I just wanted to make sure I heard you right because Sam is my nickname. My real name is Stamford. I'm named after my great Sir Stamford Raffles.
Wow, that's incredible.
So he came straight into the lab to me and said, oh, come on, you've got to make this one. And I said, well, I've just gotten this appointment to Parliament the month before, but I managed to do both and made a very classic London dry, but substituting Malay Basin botanicals such as pomelo instead of Spanish orange and lemon peel, fruit lime leaf, jasmine flower, mace, nutmeg,
Sounds amazing.
Now it's a gorgeous gin, and it's finally available here in London because Raffles London has just opened in the old War Office, just steps from Downing Street.
Right. How amazing. Gosh, that it's so fascinating. I'm really sad that we're running out of time because I could talk to you for ages about this, and I really want to come and see your garden now. Thank you so much, Jared. Jared Brown from Sipsmith, as you can tell, has done a million other things as well. But it's been absolutely wonderful having you with us here today on Goldster. Will you just bear with me for a little while I tell everybody what is coming up? So this week, I am back at Riverstone and Riverstone Live with our very own Andy Yao, our very own Goldster tutor who does Tai Chi and, of course, who everybody knows and loves. You can, of course, join online as you are at the moment, but you can also come and join us at Riverstone in London, as always, by emailing concierge@goldster.co.uk. That's at 12 p.m. on the 14th of December, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And then on Friday, I will be talking to Philippa Ashley, the author of 4 Weddings and a Christmas, alongside many, many other books. She's a romantic novelist, and she writes Christmas books as well as non-Christmas books. And she's been onto Goldster a long time ago when we first began, and she's coming back on to talk to us again about her latest works and what it's like, particularly writing books about Christmas. And then next week, Humphrey is back. He's doing author to author on the 21st of December with Hank Philippi Ryan, the best-selling author of 14 psychological thrillers. She won the most prestigious awards in the genre. She's won 5 Agathas, 5 Antonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She's also an on-air investigative reporter in Boston, and she's going to be talking to Humphrey on the 26th of December. And then he's back, 21st of December. Then he's back on the 22nd of December with Marie Powell, the author of The Last of the Gifted, I'm going to get this wrong, it's like a tongue twister, Last of the Gifted Water Sight and Spirit Sight. 2 siblings pledge their marriage to protect their people from the invading English with the help of the last true Prince of Wales. But there's a twist, there's a murder. And then on the 28th of December, we're going to have a Christmas special. This is an Inside Story Christmas special with me and Humphrey, and we're going to be talking to you about everything you want to talk about. We're going to be talking about our own books. We're going to be talking to you about the books you've enjoyed this year, what you've learned from our Goldster interviews. And we'd really love you all to come and take part and join us in the general chat. And then we've got the book of the month, and this is with me this month. So the 29th of December, get reading. I've chosen a specifically seasonal tale, Agatha Christie's writing Hercule Poirot's Christmas. So that was written just before World War II. It's a great story. If you haven't read it yet, read it. And if you have, reread it and come along and chat at our book of the month. And then going into the new year, we've got all sorts of exciting things happening. But I'd just like to say a big thank you to you, Jared. It's been great fun having you on here today. Enjoy your festive season. I'm sure that Sipsmith will be a big part of yours and many others. It's been absolutely wonderful to chat to you again. And thanks so much for coming on. Oh, and we've got a comment here. We've only heard the tip of the iceberg. Jared definitely needs to return. Absolutely remarkable session. So thank you very much for that. Take care and enjoy the rest of the month. Bye.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Great. Thank you.